Dr. Sally Sherwen, Director of Wildlife Conservation and Science, thank you so much for having me here this morning to chat to you.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really interested, I mean, we were chatting with Jenny, the CEO, earlier. I'm really interested to understand, you've not just been through a pandemic crisis, but you've also had to go through the bushfire crisis that we kicked off 2020. And give us a bit of a view of what your year has looked like in the role that you play.
Yeah, look, not many of us have had a good, happy day off, I'd say, since January 2nd. So we woke up that morning and knew the fire season was predicted to be bad this year with the extended drought and the conditions that the bush was in before the fire started. And January 2nd came and I just remember looking at the news, watching the areas that the fire was moving through, and just one of those moments that you remember where you were at that time in your life, and have it visually scarred in you, just going, this is bad for biodiversity and the state of the critically endangered species that we knew that was the stronghold of habitat for a lot of them. And so it was rough, but we've also found really interesting ways to cope with adversity and these challenges, because they're not uncommon in the world of conservation. They happen, unfortunately, quite regularly. So you do have to build up your resilience and focus on what you can do to make positive change for these threatened species, or you've got no hope of making progress in this space. So we watched it with our holding our breath, but then when it was like a call to arms for us. We're trained for this. We have some of the world's most experienced wildlife vets and threatened species biologists that were ready to go. And that day was spent just on the phone to everyone, with everyone coming back. It was supposed to be the Christmas holidays, and coming back from holidays on that day to just get together and go, what are we doing? How we needed to help this situation. And so it's been action stations since then. And just when we thought we had a bit of breathing space from the threatened species recovery and the wildlife welfare response, coronavirus hit. And but to be honest, we were ready for that to a certain extent as well. It was one of those things. We saw it coming. We got our plans ready and got ourselves ready to go and modified and adapted as we went.
Sally, I don't think there's anybody on planet Earth that wouldn't be in complete admiration for what you do. And I think you've got a team of about 40-ish people that you lead. As a leader, how do you keep your teams focused? I mean, there's no doubt at all you are trained to deal with chaos, but going from the enormity of January and the bushfire crisis that was reaching around the world, to then into COVID-19, how do you lead your team through that and keep them focused? Very much talking around the mental health component of this.
So it sounds quite bizarre, but my area of scientific specialty is animal welfare science. And so you're trained to really understand the inner workings of living beings and how stress responses and various other events in your life has impacts on you, and you can understand and see and witness those impacts. People are just another species of animal on this earth, and so there's some incredibly translatable learnings and skills and insight. Studying animal welfare for that long really does give you a unique perspective on human welfare as well. And so I think that fundamental science helps with a lot of thinking and rethinking strategies. But to be honest, the team I work for are just an incredibly committed, very well trained and experienced group of people, already 100% dedicated to the cause, and that's why they're here working for us. But I'd say our secret ingredient would be connection, and so that the strength of connection of the individuals in the team with each other as teammates, with the natural world, with the species they work with, and with the community is by far our strongest power, I think, of how everyone rallies together through this period. And so that's so important, something we value and talk about frequently as a group.
One of the things I'm also very interested in is the concept and idea of innovation. And I think it would probably be a misstep to think that you guys don't do any innovation. What does innovation look like in welfare and the science space? And if there was anything that you're working on at the moment that's different versus a couple of years ago, what is that?
So I would say science is all about innovation. You need curious minds to be able to advance your thinking and knowledge and build that understanding, and that leads to innovation because your brain is literally trained to question everything and think, is there a better way of doing this? And so working for a team of scientists, that's just a natural curiosity value that everyone has in the team. And so it's really just about making sure that we encourage that and foster that curiosity and supporting them to lead down that innovation path when needed. But I think coupled with that is staying true to what we're here for, and that's conservation and creating a future rich in wildlife and creating a community of people that care and work for wildlife. And so I think they're the building blocks of what leads to some of the great breakthroughs that we experience, and yeah, it's a pretty powerful combination.
And I'm really interested to tap into the innovation piece with your scientist minds that you all have. When you're looking at innovation, how do you focus and get into that future thinking space? You're naturally curious, innovation's in your DNA, it's something that you do continuously, but moving into that future thinking, that scenario planning, the what ifs, how do you get into that as a scientific team?
So another key part of the science we do is tracking trends. And so we look to the wild and populations of species in the threatened species world, and we monitor really closely what's going on for those species, but also in the world around them, because other external factors to each species will have a significant impact on their survival and ability to thrive in the future. So we keep a really close eye on trends and get ready, with plans ready to enact under various different scenarios. And it's the same across all of the sciences. So that's a threatened species example, but animal welfare science is another one where we track the new learnings, and that's a scientific discipline that is just exploding with new knowledge right now, particularly in awareness of animal emotions. And the community are well and truly aware of some of these new advancements as well. And so we keep track on public sentiment and trends in the science and new knowledge, and have a good general idea of where we think we're heading, but also ask our own questions and keep tabs on the species and the animals that we work with. So it's a bit of a combination of different strategies of tracking trends over time and then coming up with different plans for different scenarios that we think we need to be ready for.
Perhaps could you give us an example of that?
Christmas Island pipistrelle bat was one example where we were there to record the extinction of that species. So our researchers went in to the island at the request of various state entities and were hopeful to be able to collect a few individuals to bring them back here to the zoo to start a breeding program. Unfortunately, they were there for the last remaining weeks of the survival of the species and put out the audio recorders and just slowly heard fewer and fewer bats calling, to the point where we didn't hear them anymore on some consecutive nights. And so we've got the sound of extinction. So after that, the team regrouped and we went, we can't sit by and watch this happen again, and rallied together, pulled up different plans, looking at other species that might be in a similar situation. And from that, we've developed our what we call fighting extinction species list. So these are ones we've got a really close eye on, and we're proactively preventing their extinction. And so there's a really great example of this at the moment with the bawbaw frog, and they actually live just over that wall there. And so there's more bawbaw frogs in just over that wall there than there are left in the wild. But we were able to get in early. So we tracked a huge decline in that population as a result of fragmented habitat and disease risk coming through. And we've tracked them down to, we think there's fewer than a few hundred left up on the mountain. We managed to get in, start up after, it took us 5 years to crack the code of breeding and keeping them happy and healthy here. And they're now in what we call the bawbaw bunker and breeding and thriving well, ready to be released back to the wild. And so we did our first release of tadpoles in the wild last year, and it was one of those life-changing moments to be able to bring a species back to the wild where they belong. And that was all from the learnings of going through that recording of extinction of the Christmas Island pipistrelle.
I'm glad you pulled that story back to the tadpoles there, Sally. And that is exactly the reason that I think so many people around the world have a huge amount of appreciation for what you're doing. The impact on your team for that is must be just immeasurable. The other thing I'm really interested in is from a science, innovation, conservation and wildlife perspective, over the years, how you've seen technology become a bigger part of what you do, and how do you see that helping you in the future?
So, like so many other industries around the world, technology advancement has been a game changer for conservation, and that's because it dramatically impacts our ability to be efficient in tracking these wild populations and understanding what's going on. And so, for example, it was about 4 weeks ago, we released some orange-bellied parrots, another critically endangered species of bird that lives here in the southern parts of Australia. We think there's less than 60 left in the wild, and so every individual is critically important. And technology advancements allowed us to put this little micro satellite transmitter on them, because it's completely unknown to science what they do between Tasmania and Victoria on their migration path. And so we were able, through this technology, to be able to tag some birds, and we're now in the process of really just cracking the code on what that behaviour is in that period. So there's other uses for technology, drones that help us monitor populations. So traditionally, biologists trudge around in the field walking transects and recording what species are where, and that's how you often do biodiversity surveys. These days we can use drones to do a similar thing, and you know, use thermal imaging and things like that to pick up on species and monitor how they're going. And so what we would have been able to collect in a matter of months of those really intensive surveys, we can now get in a matter of hours as a result of technology. So some pretty exciting stuff to come out of that. And I get the sense we're just at the cusp of it as well. There's so much more to come in that space that will revolutionise what we can do for the animals.
So moving away from technology now, Sally, and looking into your strategy and innovation lens, is there anything coming out of the bushfire and coming out of COVID-19, what I'm calling this phase one that we're coming out of now, is there anything that you've accelerated and brought forwards earlier that perhaps before you might have thought, you know what, we'll leave that out for a couple of years?
Absolutely. So the example that comes to mind is a bit of a pivot in strategy that we've developed for our conservation dog squad. And I mean, everyone loves the concept, I think, of animals helping other animals. And so that's exactly what this is, because it's based on the understanding that human sensory capacity is negligible compared to the species around us. And so we've started working with an incredible group of specialists out at Healesville Sanctuary that have trained detection dogs that can actually pick up scents of different threatened species and help us track their presence and their number and abundance in certain areas. And so our original plan for the dog squad was to take it easy, just move through at incremental steps and train them on a range of different species to warm up the program a little bit. Then the bushfires hit, and we went, we need these skills and this approach to help us monitor bushfire impacted species in these areas. And so we've done a bit of a shift in strategy and now redirecting a lot of the energy and effort from the detection dog squad to focus on the bushfire impacted critically endangered species. So it's so exciting that the team is so adaptable and able to do that, including the dogs as part of that team. So yeah, it's an exciting program, and it's going to be a huge impactful move for us in our ability to help these endangered species as a result of the fires.
One of the big topics this year, perhaps even more so than normal, has been around the roles that zoos play. I think the elephant in the room, no pun intended, is Tiger King, and I think that show would never have done so well had the pandemic been here. Everyone was locked in at home, and It's been crazy to see some of the response to that. And I think there's never been also such a big focus on what zoos do. And how have you seen the image of zoos change and transform over the years, particularly now when it comes to things like conservation and the roles that you play in society?
Look, zoos aren't all equal by any means, and so it's on a pretty extensive scale from undesirable zoos to, I'd say, what we call good conservation focused zoos or zoo-based conservation organisations. And so it's, and it's a relic of a lot of the historical approaches to what zoos were known for and what they did and how they practiced and housed animals and the focus on human entertainment as that. And we are very proud to say here at Zoos Victoria that that's just not on our radar, other than reflecting and learning from the past and moving as far away from that model as we possibly can, because zoos have a critical role. Good conservation-focused zoos have a critical role to play in this future of what we've seen so far in 2020, the environmental and human catastrophes as a result of what we can call a mismanagement of our relationship with nature. Zoos are so powerful to be able to reconnect people, especially living in urbanised places, with nature and the importance of wildlife for humans and just their inherent value. And so what we try and do is stay focused on that as our mission, and everything is about working for wildlife. So what we like to say is bad zoos have wildlife that works for them, and good zoos work for the wildlife. And so that's our committed mission and what we're focusing on. And we've seen, a lot of these discussions pop up recently, and they will continue to, we think, increase in frequency as our scientific understanding of emotions of animals increases. And it's our responsibility, with the duty of care to the wildlife that lives with us, to be right on top of those understandings and do the right thing by the animals and the people that we're aiming to influence in a positive way.
Sally, and a final thought, when we eventually do come out of COVID-19 and we get over the other side, whatever that looks like, what do you hope that we will have learnt as society, or we will have a new perspective of, if you had one thing to choose?
For me, it comes down to the human relationship with nature, and nature being bigger than wildlife. It's the environment and our attitude towards the environment, and just breaking down that thought that we are dominant over other species and above the rest of the world. I think we need to really question that relationship, and it's a concept called being eco-centric, so humans as part of a bigger system, and respecting that. And it's something that First Nations people do incredibly well. It's a part of their culture and their thinking, and we have so much to learn from that and that relationship with nature. So I would love to see us, from obvious examples we've seen in this period, when humans went into lockdown, wildlife reclaimed a lot of the cities. And so there's incredible footage of that from around the world, of wild animals just cruising into cities. And so we can think of that as the human's invisible impact on the world around us, that has only become visible when humans dramatically change their behaviour. And so we've done that now. We can learn from that and come out with a different attitude about us being part of a huge interconnected world that we need to restore the balance to.
Sally, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat to me here in the beautiful surroundings of Melbourne Zoo, and also out of your role as the Director of Wildlife Conservation and Science. It's been great. I could honestly spend the whole day chatting to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.